The bells of decay tolled, though no human hand had set them ringing. They pealed across the void, unheard yet undeniable, a herald of what was to come. And when the sound finally found its echo in the atmosphere of the doomed world, it came not as music but as a cough. A wet, rasping cough, multiplying in 1,000 throats at once. The planet of Callier Prime had once been a jewel in the Imperium's crown. A manufactorum world. Its skies had always been black with smoke, its oceans choked with filth, but the Imperium cared not for beauty, only for output. Callier Prime produced tanks, shells, promethium, its workers were countless, its hives titanic. And so long as the tithes were met, no one asked what else brewed in the shadows of its towers. But the rot was already there. It began in the lower hive, as such things always do, where men lived like vermin, crammed into rusted corridors, sleeping on beds of refuse and ash, where a cut was a death sentence, and water carried more corpses than it quenched. There, in the festering dark, whispers spread of a sickness that did not heal, of boils that would not close, of skin turning the color of swamp water. The Arbites ignored it. The administratum denied it. The ecclesiarchy called it a test of faith, and the people kept coughing. The first guardsman who reported it was flogged for cowardice. He had begged his superior to quarantine the hab blocks, had spoken of eyes melting in sockets and children born already swollen with maggots. His commissar had him shot for spreading heresy. But even as his body twitched in the mud, the same cough racked the lungs of the firing squad. No one was safe. Sight, in the manufactorum spires, overseers watched as their workers slumped over assembly lines, pus dripping into the shells they forged. In the cathedrals, worshippers' faces bloomed with lesions as they prayed, the icons of the emperor streaked with mucus and blood. Even the sky itself seemed to sicken. Its clouds turned green, its rains acidic, its stars dimming behind a veil of rot. Sound. At first, the hive's great engines still roared, and the shrieks of industry masked the cries of the sick. But as bodies piled, the forges went silent, one by one. What replaced them was worse: the droning buzz of flies, the ceaseless groan of billions of lungs, the bubbling chorus of disease speaking with one voice. Smell. It was everywhere. The stink of decay, sweet and nauseating, coated the air until every breath tasted of meat left too long in the sun. The incense of the ecclesiarchy could not mask it. The promethium flames of pyres only thickened it. Even the oceans boiled with it, waves rolling with slicks of rot that gleamed under the corpse light of the moon. Touch. People of Callier Prime touched their own flesh and recoiled, for it betrayed them. Skin sagged, organs swelled, bones softened to mush. Mothers clutched infants that dissolved in their arms. Soldiers gripped their rifles, only for their fingers to fuse into the triggers, flesh and metal becoming one in suppurating union. Was then, when the planet cried out in despair, that the truth was revealed, for the plague was not natural. It was a gift from the plague god, Grandfather Nurgle. Across the lower hives, murals appeared: overnight bloated figures with flies' wings, painted in bile upon the walls. Where once prayers to the emperor had been whispered, now came laughter, wet, gurgling laughter, rising from infected throats. The faithful still clung to their shrines, but their sermons were drowned by the sound of pipes and drums made from the intestines of the dying. The world was no longer falling to disease. It was falling to worship. The Imperium did what it always does. First, it denied. Then, it punished. Regiments of the Astra Militarum were deployed to pacify unrest. They marched into hives where streets were rivers of pus and walls pulsed with tumors, and they opened fire on civilians who no longer screamed when shot. For the rot had made them numb to pain, and they marched forward even as limbs fell from their bodies. Artillery leveled entire districts, burning them to ash. But the ash itself rose again, carried by the wind, seeding more infection. The more they destroyed, the faster it spread. Then came the commissars, pistols ever ready, preaching loyalty and purity. But even their zeal faltered when they saw their own reflections in the rot, saw their teeth blackening, their fingernails falling, their skin bubbling beneath the aquilas of their uniforms. And yet, even amidst the horror, there was something worse. For those who surrendered to the disease did not despair, they sang. The workers of the hive, once broken by endless labor, now danced through the filth, bloated and laughing, embracing one another as they wept yellow tears of joy. Soldiers abandoned their posts, joining parades of plague-ridden pilgrims who chanted hymns to their new father. Even children, their tiny hands blistered and rotting, held them out in offering to the flies that crowned their heads. That it was not just the death of a world. It was its rebirth into something joyous and hideous. From orbit, the ships of the Imperial Navy watched in silence. They sent astropathic pleas for exterminatus, but the Emperor did not answer quickly enough. And in that silence, a deeper truth spread among the officers. Perhaps it was already too late. Callur Prime was not merely dying. It was becoming a garden. The guard regiments of Callur Prime had been trained to die in the Emperor's name. They had endured drill after drill, sermon after sermon, taught to see themselves as nothing more than weapons of flesh. But none of those sermons had spoken of what it meant to stand against the laughter of the plague god. The 17th Callur Rifles were the first to be ordered into the lower hives. They descended in columns, lasguns raised, bayonets fixed, their boots sinking into sludge that hissed as it ate through their solace. Their officers barked orders, their priests carried relics, their commissars drew pistols. Faith and firepower, they believed, would cleanse anything, but faith falters when your enemy does not. Sight. The guardsmen saw streets swollen with growth, buildings sagging as though the stone itself had caught fever. Corpses staggered upright, not as revenants, but as celebrants, their mouths open in eternal hymns, their bellies split with grinning mouths. Great boils bulged from the walls, bursting in sprays of filth that birthed swarms of flies larger than a man's head. Sound, the familiar sounds of battle gunfire. Orders, the tramp of boots, were smothered by another rhythm, the steady beat of drums made from stretched skin, the wheeze of pipes carved from bone. And beneath it all, a whispering chorus of laughter, rising and falling like a tide. Smell. Their rebrothers failed. The filters clogged within minutes, eaten away by spores. Guardsmen tore them off, choking on the perfume of rot, a stench both foul and strangely sweet, like spoiled fruit simmering in summer heat. It clung to them, seeped into them, until the taste of decay coated their tongues with every breath. Touch. Enemies' weapons were not swords or guns, but embraces. Bloated figures reached for them, not to strike but to clutch, to press pus-dripping lips against their cheeks, to share their sickness like a lover's kiss. The touch burned cold, and within hours, sores flowered across the guardsmen's flesh where they had been touched. The battle broke quickly, lasguns fired. Prometheum tanks roared, their flames turning crowds into charred heaps. And yet the infected advanced, laughing as they burned, arms outstretched. A guardsman shot down his own mother, then collapsed weeping as her ruined face smiled at him, even in death. Commissars executed men for faltering, their bolt rounds exploding skulls across the mud. But for every guardsman that died, 10 plague-ridden citizens rose to take their place. And when the guardsmen themselves began to cough, when blisters sprouted beneath their flak armor, their resolve shattered. The 17th Callur Rifles ceased to exist as a regiment. Some fled into the smoke, only to be swallowed by mobs of plague-bearers. Others dropped their weapons, tearing away their armor, throwing themselves into the arms of the diseased like drowning men clutching driftwood. Their screams turned to laughter as their bodies split and reformed, their skins sloughing away to reveal the gifts within. Above the world, the Navy still watched. They had expected disorder, perhaps even rebellion, but what they saw through their augurs was a transformation. Whole districts of the hive glowed with unnatural light, as if lanterns burned within the flesh of the buildings. Vast shapes writhed beneath the surface of the oceans, tentacles breaking through the waves to sprawl across rusted docks. Astropaths cried out, their minds pierced by visions of gardens blooming in the void, of worms singing lullabies in endless fields of decay. They begged the admirals to flee, but the admirals knew their orders: hold, contain, purge if possible. And so they held, and in their hesitation, the rot spread faster still. It was not just the lowborn who succumbed. Within the spires of the ruling houses, nobles locked their gates, hoarded their luxuries, and sneered at the plight of the workers. But the plague did not respect bloodlines. Within days, lords and ladies alike were vomiting black bile across gilded floors, their bodies swelling until their bones cracked beneath the weight. Their silken robes became burial shrouds, their banquet halls transformed into plague feasts where servants devoured their masters. Remains with laughter. In the manufactorum, the great machines did not stop, they changed. Belching engines grew tumors, conveyor belts pulsed like veins, and assembly lines produced not shells but swarms of flies that crawled forth in waves, blanketing entire districts. The tech priests wailed prayers to the Omnicia, but their own augmentations rusted and rotted upon their bodies. Cogitators displayed only one phrase over and over: rejoice, for grandfather comes. And still, there were those who resisted. In the heart of High Viscander, a single bastion of the guard remained. The 42nd Steel Legion, reinforced by remnants of shattered Callier regiments, fortified the spire's lower levels. They sealed the gates, erected walls of sandbags and steel, mounted heavy bolters at every choke point. Chaplains preached fire and purity, commissars executed deserters by the dozen, and priests led ceaseless litanies to the emperor. But outside the gates, the plague-ridden gathered. Millions of them. They sang, they danced, they prayed to their new god, their voices swelling into a single maddening hymn that rattled the walls. And every day, the defenders saw more of their comrades coughing blood, more eyes turning yellow, more smiles creeping across once solemn faces. It was not a siege. It was a waiting game. In the last Vox recordings from Callier Prime, one can still hear the desperation. The steady drum of heavy bolters, the thunder of artillery, the prayers shouted over the screams. And then, beneath it all, the laughter, closer now, deeper, more unified. The Vox ends not in silence, but in song. Thousands of voices, once imperial, now devoted to another master. Glory. Glory to the Lord of Flies. Glory to the Father of Decay. Glory to Nurgle, who loves us all. And so the descent was complete. Callier Prime was no longer an imperial world. It was a wound in reality, a garden blooming in corruption, its soil watered by tears and blood. The Imperium could still order its destruction. The Navy could still fire its cyclonic torpedoes and reduce the surface to molten glass. But would that truly kill it? For already, the flies had taken flight. Already, spores rode the winds of the void. And even as the admirals debated, other worlds began to cough. The defenders of Callier Prime never knew when the line had truly broken. Perhaps it was when the first plague-bearers breached the gates, their rusted blades dripping with ichor. Perhaps it was when the Vox channels fell silent, replaced by the low, gurgling chant of demons. Or perhaps it was earlier still, when the first guardsman laughed instead of screamed as his flesh peeled away. No one could agree on the exact moment. But all who survived agreed on one truth: the world itself gave up before its soldiers did. The last bastion at High Viscander was a fortress of steel and prayer. The 42nd Steel Legion and their ragged allies held the walls with discipline born of desperation. For weeks they endured the tide. Every assault was met with Lascan volleys, heavy bolters, and flamers. Streets ran black with burnt corpses. The air quaked with the thunder of artillery. But even as they fought, the hive itself turned against them. The walls wept foul water. Gates rusted into powder beneath their hands. Ammunition crates split open to reveal maggots squirming through ruined powder. Medicae stations stank with the sweet rot of infection. Wounded soldiers returned to duty smiling, their eyes jaundiced, their skin pocked with sores. They sang as they fought. They laughed as they burned. Commissars executed hundreds for heresy, for despair, for coughing blood at the wrong moment. And still the laughter spread. When the breach finally came, it was not heralded by artillery or assault. It came with silence. The hymn outside the walls stopped. The air grew still. Then the gates sagged open, their hinges bloated and dripping pus. And through the fog shuffled not demons, but children diseased, skeletal, their eyes bright with unnatural joy. They carried flowers made of rot, and they sang in voices that pierced every man's heart. Some guardsmen fired. Most could not. Behind the children came the tide. Plague-bearers, great unclean ones, and twisted shells of former comrades. The fortress dissolved into madness. Flamers roared. Lasguns screamed. Bayonets clashed with rusted scythes. And yet, as the men of the Imperium fought, their flesh betrayed them. Blisters burst. Bones snapped. Fingers melted around triggers. By nightfall, Hiva Skander sang with a single voice. The Imperial Navy had no choice. High above the planet, debates raged in shadowed command decks. Some demanded immediate exterminate as scorch the planet, burn it to ash, deny Nurgle his prize. Others hesitated, whispering of the billions still untainted, of the manufacturing output that could yet be salvaged. It was hesitation that damned them. For every hour they waited, Callier Prime festered deeper into the warp. The oceans boiled with filth, birthing leviathans crowned with antlers of bone. The skies split with swollen clouds, raining maggots that consumed ships whole. And across the planet's surface, gardens bloomed forests of flesh and bone, rivers of pus winding through fields of grinning corpses. When the order finally came, when the admirals gave the command to cleanse the world, it was already too late. Cyclonic torpedoes fell, striking the surface with apocalyptic force. Entire continents cracked. Fire consumed the hives. Oceans turned to steam. Billions of voices screamed at once. And yet, amid the fire, the laughter remained, for Nurgle is patient. Nurgle is enduring. The firestorm did not destroy his garden. It fed it. When the flames died, Callier Prime still lived. Not as an imperial world, but as a shrine. A demon world in truth. In the centuries that followed, Callier Prime became a warning whispered among regiments. Its name was erased from charts, purged from administratum records, but soldiers remembered. In the trenches of Armageddon, in the jungles of Katachan, in the void ships drifting between stars, guardsmen spoke of it in hushed tones. Better the last burn of a commissar's bolt pistol than the kiss of Nurgle's rot. The survivors, if they could be called that, were never truly free. Navy crews infected in orbit carried the plague to other systems. Refugees fled in secret, their coughs disguised as exhaustion, their sores hidden beneath rags. Entire subsectors trembled as spores spread unseen, carried in the breath of the desperate. And the Imperium learned nothing, for the Imperium does not learn. It endures. And in its endurance, it damns countless worlds to repetition. The legacy of Callier Prime is not its death, it is its cycle. Every hive world lives on the edge of such collapse. Every trench is one cough away from contagion. Every guardsman knows, though none will speak it, that his service is not to win, but to delay. To hold the line long enough that someone, somewhere else, might breathe a little longer before the rot comes for them in turn. The Emperor does not answer their prayers. The Ecclesiarchy speaks only of duty. The Mechanicus chants only of function. And in the silence between prayers, in the fever of disease, the laughter of Grandfather Nurgle is always waiting. At the end of all things, Callier Prime is just one story among countless billions. A world consumed, a people forgotten, a garden grown where once there was industry. But for those who stood upon its soil, who fought and wept and laughed as their bodies unraveled, it was everything. And their voices, though silenced by fire, still echo in the warp. For in the grim darkness of the far future, even death is not an ending. It is only another bloom in Nurgle's garden, another joke in the endless laughter of decay. And even hope is just another lie whispered in the dark.